Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lana, and today I will tell you the best books I read in 2024. Overall, in 2024, I read 52 books and I gave quite a few 5 stars. Not a lot, but more than I gave last year, and the average rating was 4 stars, which I thought was great. I had a few moments within the year where my reading would slow down a little, but overall I'm very happy with how it went. So let's start with number 10, and that is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Right? Weir, yes. I'm not a sci-fi girl. I don't care about space. I usually don't like reading about space. I read sci-fi before, I read books set in space before, and they were okay, but that's not a setting that I enjoy or that I care a lot about. But this book, this book was incredible, and it's so beloved, and I can see why. One of the reviews talked about it as a very accessible sci-fi, and I absolutely agree. There is a lot of science in this book, a lot of physics in this book, but it never feels like too much. This book talks about Ryland, who is a junior high science teacher, and in the beginning of the book he wakes up in space and he has no idea who he is and where he is and what's happening, and slowly he starts to remember everything that happened and that he's on a very important mission of saving humanity. How is something he has to figure out and uncover on the way. And one of the fun things about this book, as I said, there's a lot of science in it, but because it comes from Ryland, he, as a teacher to teenagers, the way he thinks about science and the way he approaches science is very understandable. It's not overly complicated. He talks about science as he would to a child or someone who doesn't know anything about science, which is, well, most people. It's never so theoretical that you don't care about it. Like, you understand how it's applicable in the situation, and that makes it more interesting as well. There is a lot of humor. Ryland is very funny. He uses jokes as self-defense and he's also alone for a big part of this book, so he has to keep up his own spirits and do it in any way he can. I listened to the audiobook and I recommend the audiobook so much. There is a friendship in this book that is beautiful, with a non-human form, and the way it was portrayed in the audiobook is incredible. It's so real, and you really read it and think that this could be true, this could be reality. The whole premise of the book is pretty almost tragic, but the reading experience is so fun and entertaining, and the ending, if you read this book, the ending, it almost made me cry. It was so beautiful. Again, it's very funny and endearing, and it's so human, and I highly recommend this book. In number 9, I have How to Solve Your Own Murder by Kristen Perrin. This is a murder mystery that has 2 timelines, one in the 60s and one in the present day. In the 60s, we follow Frances, who is a 16-year-old girl, and on a night out with her friends, they stop by a fortune teller, and the fortune teller tells her a prophecy in which she says that Frances will be one day murdered. And from that day on, Frances gets obsessed with the idea of solving her own murder, stopping it. She collects all kinds of dirt on everyone in her life. Everyone is a potential suspect. She thinks of motives, she thinks of clues, and we kind of follow that story in almost like diary entries. And in the present day, we follow Annie, who is an aspiring murder mystery writer, and she's summoned to the estate of her rich great aunt, which she has never met, who is Frances. But by the time that Annie gets to the estate, Frances has been murdered, and Annie tries to solve the case and see if all the clues and all that information that Frances has collected over the years will be helpful. This is a very nice story. I really liked both of the timelines. The current timeline is more dynamic, and the one in the 60s, there's just something about the dynamic between the friend group that we follow, the atmosphere. It was just very interesting to follow. And I find that for me with a lot of books, every book has its own, almost like a color palette or aesthetic or a sound palette or something. It's like a different world, and some books, the story might be very nice and good, but I don't enjoy the aesthetic of it or the room that my mind creates for the book, if that makes any sense. And this is a book where I really enjoyed being in this world, even though this is I can't say that the murder mystery is astonishing or does something absolutely new, but it was so nice reading this book. It was so comforting, and I really enjoyed it, and I can see why it's on so many people's lists this year. Number 8 is the nonfiction book Nudge by Richard H. Thaler and Cass R. Sunstein. I hope I pronounced that correctly. This book is something I think about a lot. It's about behavioral economics and behavioral science, or rather how governments and companies use behavioral science to help us make choices. According to the authors, no choice that we make is ever presented in a neutral way. There's always something that makes us want to choose one option over the other. And what they're talking about is how governments and companies, as they say, gently, non-coercively push people towards doing something that they really want to do. And they show different examples of that, from something very mundane, for example, putting healthier foods in a more accessible way in a cafeteria so that you would automatically reach for it more than something unhealthy, to, for example, whether you have to opt in or opt out of a health insurance when you get a job, or becoming an organ donor. Also was a very interesting chapter in this book, and they call these systems choice architecture, and it's very fun seeing them all around you after reading this book. So this is not a book on behavioral science as it is why we do these things, what are our biases, but more like how can we use that information. And number 7 is the memoir Finding Me by Viola Davis. What a phenomenal book this was. I read this book on audio and she narrates it, and it's so incredible hearing her story from with her own voice. It's wonderful. Her story is very compelling. She did not have an easy life. Her family did not have an easy life, and she went through so much, and all of those stories were very interesting and incredible on their own. But the thing that I loved most about this book, that made it so much more special, is that the way she was telling the story of her life was almost as if she was trying to understand it herself, and sort of as if she was for the first time touching memories that she has never processed. And so she's slowly unraveling and trying to process everything that happened to her on the page as she's telling you this. It feels so honest, and you sort of expect a story of someone who started from you know, a very difficult life situation, but then they end the story with, oh, and now I'm this rich, beautiful, famous actress. But there are many parts even closer to the end of the book where you see that you can't really shed your past, and when you live your life so long feeling that you're not seen. A big part of this book was about, you know, growing up as a Black woman as well. Those feelings don't get canceled just because you get famous. And having her share some of those insecurities and difficult feelings as she was already as an established actor was very interesting and something I did not expect. There are also a lot of complicated family dynamics and the very difficult and complex relationship with people who have wronged you or your family in the past, but they are your family and you still love them. And it's quite a book and I actually teared up quite a few times. I said this many times already that this book is so honest. When you hear it in her own voice, sometimes it almost feels like you're being told a secret or something that she's never said to anyone. And that just feels so special, and I highly recommend this book. Number 6 is a book I've already spoke about on this channel, and that is Exercised by Daniel Lieberman, The Science of Physical Activity, Rest, and Health. I love a nonfiction book about health. I love nonfiction books about fitness, and this was the perfect book. It is number 6 because I do think that fictional books do something more for my soul, but in terms of non-fiction, this was definitely the best book of the year for me. It just has such a big impact on my life. I spent months telling everyone about this book, everything I learned in this book. I spent too much time during my training sessions with my trainer telling him stories from this book and be like, do you know this, and do you know this, and do you know this? Also, now that I am a seasonal runner, as in I participate in races during the summer and I almost do no running in the winter, I really loved learning about running, why we run, why did we start running, how good is running, how bad is running. So here are some of the questions that this book answers. If we are born to walk and run, why do most of us take it easy whenever possible? Does running ruin your knees? Should we do weights, cardio, or high intensity training? Is sitting really the new smoking? Can you lose weight by walking? And how do we make sense of the conflicting, anxiety-inducing information about rest, physical activity, and exercise with which we are bombarded? Daniel Lieberman is an anthropologist, so there's a lot of anthropology and evolutionary biology in this book. He looks at how did it happen that we now have to pay to go somewhere to run nowhere on a treadmill. I actually came across the physical copy of this book after I've already read it, and it's a pretty thick book and it has a lot of images and diagrams and stuff. I listened to this on audio and I did not notice how long the audiobook was because I was just so engrossed. I loved it so much. He does a lot of myth busting and I really enjoy the fact that he really looked at each topic from many different perspectives. He does talk about different diseases that may or may not be linked to our levels of physical activity. He talks about aging and how that is connected to our levels of physical activity. There's just so much in this book and it's such a foundational book, I would say, and I really enjoyed it. And I'd say that if any of this sounds interesting to you, then definitely pick it up. It's incredible. And now we're moving on. Now we're moving on to the top 5. Now we're moving on to the top 5. And number 5 is The Mysterious Case of the Alperton Angels by Janice Hallett. This is a book that broke my brain. So this book talks about Amanda Bailey, who is a true crime writer, and she is set to write a book on the Alperton Angels case, which happened in the 90s. The Alperton Angels were a cult led by the Archangel Gabriel, in which the angels brainwashed a teenage girl that her baby that she was pregnant with was the Antichrist and that it needs to die. But before the murder could take place, the girl comes to her senses, calls the police, and the rest of the angels commit suicide. And it's been 18 years since that day, so the baby the Antichrist of the 90s, is about to turn 18, and Amanda is trying to find out the identity of that child so that she gets a great scoop for her book. And there's another journalist, or writer I should say, Oliver, who is a rival who also is trying to find out the identity of the child, and so Amanda has to work with him. They kind of start helping each other. This is a book that is fully told in mixed media. We get emails, we get WhatsApp messages, we get phone conversation transcripts of phone conversations, and excerpts from different fictionalized media that was inspired by the Alperton Angels. And this book is wild. For most of it, you don't fully understand what's happening. You sort of start to, but then that theory doesn't really pan out, and then you look at a different aspect of maybe this can explain this. You're trying to explain some wild events that do not make any sense. And there are so many plot twists. There are so many moments when everything is completely turned on its head, and the ending was out of this world. I did not expect it. I felt like my brain was on fire. I was just confused and excited and shocked. So many emotions. And for a while, there is a part of this book when you read and you don't really understand what you're reading and why you're reading it, and why does this make sense. This probably could have been cut, and this could have been cut. No, it could not. No, it could not. It all makes sense. It all has to be there, and it's a crazy journey, but it's worth it. And number 4 is a book I'm sure you've already heard people talk about. I'm pretty late to this hype train, but that is Babel by R.F. Kuang. What an incredible work of art this book is. So Babel is sort of like a fantastical alternative history. It's set in 1820s, 30s, and we follow Robin, who lost his all his surviving family members to cholera in China, and is brought to Britain by a mysterious professor. He's trained in Latin, Greek, and Chinese languages in order to get into the prestigious Royal Institute of Translations in Oxford. He does get in, and he starts learning to be a translator. So the fantastical element in this world comes in the form of silverworking, and silverworking is basically the root of the power of the British Empire with which they seek to colonize the rest of the world. And that Royal Institute of Translation is called Babel. And the research into foreign languages in Babel is solely done to be able to make the British Empire bigger and to colonize as much of the world as possible. Robin becomes a student. He really likes languages. He really enjoys the world of translations. He finds friends. So there's a wonderful friend group in this book, but slowly he has to grapple with what it all means for the rest of the world. There are a lot of topics raised. Colonialism, yes, but also privilege, and why do we translate and how do we translate, and sort of see how easy it is when the work you do is overall problematic to humanity, how easy it is to explain it away to yourself if you don't actually actively see the impact that your work does to the world. So it's a lot of interesting topics. Robin goes on this journey. He changes his mind. He makes decisions. Like, you see him, you live through this experience with him. And apart from the incredible way that this was plotted, all the plot twist gets pretty dark. I did not expect a lot of things to happen. Actually, I was telling my friend in the middle of this book that I actually have no idea where it will go, because it's so unlike any other book I read that I can't even, like, I have no idea it can do anything at this point. And it did. It really surprised me many times. So the incredible plot, the writing style. Apart from that, I loved the setting. I love dark academia. This was kind of like dark academia with all of its problematic aspects. And I also love languages and translations. I worked as a translator myself for a while, so all of this felt so interesting and nice, and I loved looking at these topics from this perspective, and I highly recommend it. Number 3 is Dark Fire by C.J. Sansom. This is book 2 in the Matthew Shortlake series, which is a historical murder mystery series. I loved this book so much. I liked it much more than I liked the first book, and I liked the first book enough to continue in the series, so that says something. This book and this whole series follows Matthew Shortlake, who is a lawyer in London, and he's linked to Thomas Cromwell during the reign of Henry VIII. He, at the point of this book, is already very wary of that link to Thomas Cromwell. He doesn't really agree with the things that Thomas Cromwell is doing in this book, so he's trying to set some distance with him. At the beginning of the book, an old friend asks Matthew to help defend his niece, a girl who is a very young girl who is accused of murder, and because the girl refuses to speak in prison, she will not speak of her in defense of herself at all. He has to uncover who the real murderer is in order to help her. And at the same time, Thomas Cromwell comes back and asks him for a favor, which is not really asking for a favor. He gives him a job to do. And so we have two mysteries, two investigations happening at the same time. It's all very vivid. The atmosphere is incredible. You can really feel what it was like in London that summer. You can almost smell the city, if that makes any sense. It's so vivid. I love how he both creates a great atmosphere, but also his plot is so I wouldn't say it's very fast, but you do not want to put this book down. You want to keep going. I read this physically, and this is one of the reasons why it's so high up in my top 10, is because I loved the experience of reading this book, and I kept wanting to pick it up and continue reading. I would not get tired at all, even though this is historical, and you know, I normally think of historical books as something more slow, something you have to like really get into, and that was not the case with this book at all. I was so engaged, I was so interested in everything that was going on. Both mysteries were very interesting, and I just highly recommend this series. I plan to continue with the series this year. We'll see how the rest of the series fares for me, but it really deserves its number 3 spot. In my number 2 spot is a book that came as a complete surprise. I'm still shocked that it's so high up in my rating. It's There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job by Kikuko Tsumura. Wow. It's so hard to explain just how shocked I am at how much I like this book, because on the surface it doesn't have the things I usually enjoy in books and usually the things that I look in books. So this book is about a woman, I think she's in her 30s, I think she's 35 maybe, who is starting a new job. And what you learn as you go is that she actually went to an employment agency and requested a job that was close to her home. It requires no reading, no writing, and ideally very little thinking. And this book has 5 chapters, and each chapter is a new job that she's starting and trying and seeing what it's like. It's very mundane, as in nothing super dramatic happens. You sort of just see her everyday life at these different jobs, how she gets used to them, how she tries to understand how the dynamics work and the routine, and how she gets used to all the responsibilities that are given to her. The reason why she's doing all of this, why she quit her original job, was because of burnout, and you don't actually get to learn what that job entailed, what that job was, until the very, very end. You just know that this is a person who really doesn't want her job to take over her life, and so she tries all of these jobs that seem very easy, that seem like they don't require much. And as the title suggests, there's no such thing as an easy job, because your job is your life. It starts to impact your life outside of work, your thinking, what you notice, what you do. Getting to explore that was very interesting. I also really enjoyed just learning about different jobs and what they entail, and imagining myself in those jobs. There's one job that she was given that she said was very easy, that, you know, she was not worried about it at all, because it was just so easy that would be so hard for me. And if I were told to do that, I would freak out, because that's something that is not something I'm comfortable with. So it's also interesting seeing how we're all very different in what we find easy or not. Some people call it boring, meandering. I found it not boring, just very comforting. It was just so normal that it was comforting. This was a very big surprise for me, and this was the first book I finished in 2024. So there you go. And number one, my best book of the year, I did not expect at all. And that is The Death of a Salesman by Arthur Miller. It's a play. It's a very short book, but oh my god, I cried so much during this book. I actually found not an audiobook. Well, I guess it's kind of like an audiobook. It's like a full cast read of this play. So I got to read it and listen to it at the same time, which is great because I got to experience a lot of the acting choices that you don't get by just reading a play. This was wow. It won the Pulitzer Prize for Drama in 1949 and a Tony Award for Best Play. And yes, it did. Yes, it did. So this talks about a dysfunctional family. The main character, I guess, is our salesman, who is now 60 years old. It's about, you know, getting older and getting cast aside after years of hard work, after a career that has not really been successful. And it's about very big expectations. There's also a difficult relationship between father and son. It's just so sad, but also kind of unavoidable in a way. Like, you look at all of these situations, all of these people, and there's not like one thing they can do to make all of this better. It's so ingrained in their personalities and their dynamics with each other. There's also the aspect of someone who's been doing something for so long and talking a big game about something without it being actually successful, that it's almost like you cannot stop and change your tune. You sort of almost, as I see it, trick yourself into this delusion, because if you accept that it's wrong, then it's almost like your whole life has been wrong then, which is also a very difficult and sad topic to explore. Anyway, I really want to see this play in the theater now. This had a very big impact on me, and if you have a chance to see it, please do. These have been my best 10 books of 2024. There have been others that I really enjoyed and liked, but I only had 10 spots to give. So there you go. Let me know what your best book of 2024 was, if you know any of the books that I've mentioned today, or if there's any that you're interested in and you might pick up in the future. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!